Welcome, everyone. Rosaura, I think we can begin.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us and welcome to NHF's 73rd Annual Bleeding Disorders Conference. This session will start shortly. In the meantime, we would like to take some time to thank the generosity of our 2021 sponsors. Without their support, this event would not be possible. Our platinum sponsors, Sanofi Genensci and Takeda, our gold sponsors, CSL Behring, Genentech, and Novo Nordisk, and our silver sponsor, Bayer. We would like to make sure that you get the most from this session, so here are some tips. Please feel free to use the chat box to write in any questions or comments that you may have. The speaker will try to respond to as many as possible at the end of this session. As always, make sure to give additional feedback at the end by filling out your evaluation forms. And lastly, this presentation will be recorded and it will be available to watch online at a later time.
Thank you, Rosaura. So I would like to welcome you again to our session called You Hold the Key, How Your Experiences Can Shape Research. My name is Maria Santaeda, and I am the research nurse at the National Hemophilia Foundation's Research Department. I have no disclosures. So I would like for you guys to indulge me for a few minutes and just imagine a world where we couldn't diagnose bleeding disorders, where there was no way for us to understand or diagnose or label any bleeding condition, not the hemophilias, not von Willebrand's, not factor 7 or 10 or 11 or 13, none of the platelet disorders. There was really no way for us to understand what was the cause of the bleeding. So also imagine a world that even if we could tell what that diagnosis was, that treatment looked like this: days, weeks, sometimes months on ends in clinical and hospital beds, getting substandard treatments to try to treat bleeding episodes, much less prevent them, with medications that were not really proven to be as safe and as effective as the ones that we have today. So imagine a world in which our kids and our youth could not participate in any kind of play, much less sports, because of our fear of them getting hurt or constant bleeding as a result. So imagine a world, and when you look at life expectancy, how old people grow out to be in the United States, for example, our population's life expectancy will be cut in half, and sometimes even less than that. And believe it or not, these were all things that were like this in the not so distant past. But thankfully, our world looks like this. If you don't know Chris Bombardier was the first person with hemophilia to summit Mount Everest, first of few people who've actually accomplished this feat. And he did it because of advances in sciences that allowed him to be fit, to be both physically and mentally, of course, and to have treatment, appropriate treatment, so that hemophilia would not be a limiting factor. And so you might want to think, well, how was this accomplished? How if in the distant past things looked like the pictures that I've showed you, within the last couple minutes, and how is it today, looking at Chris Bombardier's picture? Well, I'm here to tell you that it was all thanks to research, advances in science, and to all the researchers, patients, human and other kinds, and funders. We must thank them every step of the way. These were people that worked diligently, that were astute, that were smart, and that actually participated in the research process. And thanks to them, we have the advances that we have today. And if you look at the patient journey, every step of the way has been impacted by research, and this research that I've been talking to you about. In the realm of diagnosis, we can now diagnose an array of bleeding disorders, and be very, very granular at this point, right? We have treatment options, whereas before we may have had one or two. Now we have different types. We have factor replacement, we have non-factor replacements. We're at the cusp of gene therapy. All those advances in science has allowed our patients to have normal lives, to engage in sports, to be able to go to school, to go to work, to be active members in society. We also have come a long way in specialized care. Even though we are a rare community of rare disorders, we have specialized care through our hemophilia treatment center network, where we know our patients thrive and get the best care so that they can be the best version of themselves, and try to mitigate the negative impacts of bleeding disorders. And obviously, at the end of the day, what we really want is to improve quality of life. And so that is why it's very important for patients to become involved in the research process, because we want to understand from them what does it mean to have a better quality of life? What would make your life better than what it is today? And then based on that, we can continue advancing the science. But you all know, probably, hopefully, that there's still so much to be done. So you might be asking yourself, how can we help advance science in the care of people with inherited bleeding disorders? Well, you already can tell that we all have the power to contribute to the science, whether you're a scientist, a researcher, a clinician, a patient. We all have it within us to be able to contribute to this continued progress. Oops, wrong way. And we can all do that by obviously getting involved in research, because without you, without us, without the whole team, these advancements would not be possible. So just a refresher, what is research? Well, research is a systematic investigation designed to create or contribute to generalized knowledge. Basically, a process by which we generate new knowledge. And it can take many, many forms. And the ultimate goal depends on who is conducting the research and for what purpose, right? Is it a pharmaceutical company who wants to bring about a new therapy for a rare bleeding disorder? Is it a marketing company who's trying to develop educational tools for patients to learn about gene therapy, for example? Is it a social worker or a physical therapist or a nurse or a doctor, anybody within the hemophilia treatment center that wants to understand how to better treat their patients? So as you can see, there's an array of goals, there's an array of forms that this research can take. So if you look at who conducts or supports research in our community, we have large groups of people who are actually actively doing that. And you might think, oh my God, so many, why so many? Well, the more the better, and I'll tell you a little bit more in the next slide. But of course, you have the multidisciplinary team within the Hemophilia Treatment Center. And then you have other scientists that may not live within the auspice of hemophilia treatment centers, but are conducting, for example, basic science projects. We have the pharmaceutical industry, like I just shared with you. We have Hemophilia Federation of America and the National Hemophilia Foundation, both advocacy organizations, but are looking at ways to improve the lives of the bleeding disorders community. We have the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, which has been looking at the bleeding disorders population for a long, long time, ensuring that our treatments are safe and effective, and that we're actually looking at risk and mitigate the risks of living and with a bleeding disorder and its treatments. We have National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, which is part of our federal government that funds research in our community. You have ATHEN, which through HTCs holds a clinical database that collects information on our patients and our patients' treatments and how they're doing, with an idea to contribute to the generation of knowledge, of course. So why get involved, and why do we need all these people conducting research at the same time? Well, if you look at this report conducted by the International Rare Disease Research Consortium, they looked at the research that's being conducted in only rare disease and determined that only 2% of research projects focus on rare and hematologic disorders. So that is a very small portion of an already very small pie. So we should all be looking at this and trying to find ways of collaborating with this. So one of the types of research in our community, I already told you that it comes in different forms and in different manners. So for example, we can look at basic science, basic research, and you can you can ask yourself, what is this? Well, this is really basic. This is the fundamental, the building blocks of research. And it usually happens in a laboratory, and it usually uses either cell cultures or animal models. These are the early gene therapies where had to start in basic science to get to where we are today. So it's the fundamentals, it's the proof of concepts, it's trying to understand the biology, trying to understand how things work so that we can then create treatments or improve treatments. We also see interviews in our community, and this can be done by an array of people. It can be done by hemophilia treatment centers, by other healthcare providers. It can be done by industries. It can be done in person, by phone, and now post-COVID in video conferencing. We have surveys, and which again can be done by healthcare providers or industry. They can be paid or unpaid. They may contain patient-reported outcome measures, and I'll talk to you a little bit about what these are. And these are really instruments. They're a group of questions that have been tested to ensure that they measure something tangible when, in the spectrum of subjectiveness. And they're used more and more in research. They can be done for marketing purposes, so they could be done for clinical purposes to understand something a little bit more, but they could also be done for marketing purposes. And of course, they can be done in paper or electronic. We have focus groups as well, and these focus groups, again, they can be done by healthcare providers or by industry. They can be paid or unpaid. And, sometimes an example of these are advisory boards that you may participate on. We have surveillance projects, and this is where the UDC, the community counts, where the CDC comes in. They've been looking at our population since the 80s, maybe even before that, to look at the treatments to ensure that they're safe, that they're effective, and look at risk factors that perhaps by really understanding them, we can mitigate and address them so that they're not. Longitudinal simply means that they're looking over the populations for a long period of time. So this allows whoever is conducting the research to look for patterns, to look for, to look at this population over a period of time to really understand cause and effect. Clinical research, of course, it happens in the HTCs or in the clinic. It can be translational. We mean that we are taking concepts and we're taking treatments and we're taking things that we've understood or learned from earlier basic science and now bringing them into the clinic and really trying to understand or corroborate that it does indeed improve or positively impacts our patients. We have data sets. For example, the most important one by far in our community is done by ATHEN, is kept by ATHEN, the American Thrombosis and Hemostasis Network. And this is a clinical data set. And patients, again, it's longitudinal, so they're following patients over a long period of time, which is ideal to really understand the population. But and participants register through your HTC. So when you go to your annual comp visit, you will be approached to participate in studies sponsored or supported by ATHEN. They are actually in collaborations with the CDC, so they are the ones who are collecting the data. The surveillance project for the CDC is also done through ATHEN. And of course, you have the clinical trials, and the clinical trials are usually a partnership between the pharmaceutical companies and the hemophilia treatment centers. And their ultimate goal is to investigate safety and efficacy of new treatments and devices. And lastly, we have registries. And registries are, for example, community voices in research, which I will touch upon at the end of the presentation, in that it collects information for patients. And again, it could be longitudinal. So how is NHF involved in research? Well, incredibly, many people don't know that NHF has been funding research since the 1970s. Today, we fund almost $2 million a year. We have plans of increasing those funds, and we fund an array of projects, different providers within the HTC network, basic science to clinical research, and anything and everything in between. We also conduct some research, and it's usually done through surveys. Like I told you, one of those ways that we can conduct research. And we survey sometimes our providers, our healthcare providers, sometimes our patients or our consumers. And then anything that we conduct, or anything that we hear that it's important to our community, we first publish them. Okay, so if we conduct research, we're actually publishing the findings, because one of the most important aspects of research is not just doing research and then that's it. It's actually disseminating the information, is contributing to that body of knowledge. And we do that by publishing the findings so that others can build on what has been found before them. We take all these publications, whether it's NHF's conducted research or others, and we educate our consumers, we educate our families on what those critical findings are. And now we're most focused on our CVR, which is where I'm going to spend a little bit of my time, my few minutes. So what is the CVR? CVR is Community Voices in Research. Some of you might know it as MyBDC. It was previously known as MyBDC. And what it is a community-powered registry that provides a 360-degree view of living with a bleeding disorder. And the way that it does that is that it collects information through electronic surveys from patients, those who have a diagnosis of a bleeding disorder, but also their parents, their siblings who are not affected, their grandparents if they are part of their life, because we understand that living with a bleeding disorder not affects not only that individual with the diagnosis, but it impacts the whole entire family. So we want to look into that family unit and try to understand how is the family impacted, and what are ways that we can do to address those issues. It also encourages participants to become active partners in research, the research process, and their healthcare. And I'll talk to you a little bit about how that happens. And most importantly, it helps identify research priorities. So if we understand what the lived experience of those living with a bleeding disorder, if we really understand what that looks like, then we might come up with research questions that we might not otherwise know to look or to ask. And so you might say, oh, another survey, another registry, why is this really important? And I'm here to tell you that your voice, your experience as a patient or as a family member of a person with a bleeding disorder is much more important than you think. So this self-reported information, right, because the patient, the consumer, the family is actually reporting their experience. It's gathered through electronic surveys, like I told you. So what we have now is we have our current surveys, which are the enrollment, the affected baseline, so patients who are directly affected by a diagnosis, and the unaffected baseline. And these are the mother and the father who might not necessarily have a bleeding disorder, or a sibling that does not have a bleeding disorder. That baseline survey is addressed to them. The enrollment survey is very short, 2 to 3 minutes. The affected baseline is more like 10, 15 minutes, but it collects a lot of information that I'll show you a little bit about. We also have hot topic surveys, and examples of this are the vaping, the COVID-19, the pain, and the logging survey. And these are surveys that are short, to the point, and that sometimes address something that is happening in our society, and we want to be able to understand how it's affecting our community, the bleeding disorders community. So for example, vaping was a huge health issue, health concern. It seems like a long time ago, about a couple of years ago. We actually surveyed our patients and our participants, our CVR participants, and we said, hey, have you been involved? Do you vape? Do you use cigarettes? And what that allowed us to do was to understand how many of them were affected, if they were really seriously affected, and it provided us an opportunity or a mechanism by which we could provide information to make sure that they were educated and informed of the health concerns at the moment with vaping. COVID-19, the same thing. We did a short survey, not really knowing that COVID-19 was going to be a multi-month issue. And we just wanted to take the pulse of the community. How were they dealing with it? Were they anxious? Were they depressed? Were they scared? And so we sent out a COVID-19 survey. We also did a pain survey and a login survey. So future surveys that we're thinking about the future, we're thinking about a core survey. It's actually in development right now. And the idea with this core survey is that we can, again, remember when I talked to you about longitudinal, this is going to be a way that we can then understand and try to look for trends and patterns over time. So some of the questions in the baseline survey will be included in the core survey. And then other research surveys as they come. Of course, a participant agreement is presented to the potential participant before they sign up and before they can take any of the real surveys. And the idea with this is that even though we don't require an informed consent because we were reviewed by an IRB and deemed exempt, we want this to be a true partnership, and we want the participants to feel confident and understanding how this information is being used. How is it being saved, and why is it important to participate? Other things that we are thinking and that we're projecting towards the future is that I'm going to show you what the dashboard looks like, but we're hope that we can do 1 or even 2 health reports a month. So I'll show you what those look like. Conducting virtual advisory panels, and this is the mechanism that we have to ensure that the community's input is part of every aspect of a research project, for example, so that we're gathering information as to what is important to them and what's feasible for them, for the potential participants. CVR printer record, I'm going to show them to you, and educational resources, I'll tell you how we do that through the CVR. Future plans is to actually participate in the summit, State of the Science Summit, Research Summit that we have planned for the fall, and try to get input from the community as to what should be included in that research blueprint that we're trying to create through the SOS. And if you don't know what the SOS, Dr. Valentino has talked about it in this meeting, and we have many webinars that you can look in the NHF website. So please do look for it. It's going to be an exciting meeting in the fall. And a clinical trial validator. Many times we hear from our consumers that it's really hard to find what type of research projects are being conducted in hemophilia, or in a factor 7 deficiency, or in gene therapy, for example. And so NHF is looking at ways to facilitate that. So those people who are interested in learning what type of clinical trials are being conducted, whether it's in the area or in the community, they can have an easy way of getting that information. So I've told you a little bit about the CVR, and the way we at NHF look at CVR is that it is a community partnership. It's not just another survey. It's a way that we gather information from the community, directly from the community, that it's not filtered through any healthcare provider or any research associate. It comes directly from the community telling us what their experience is really like. But in turn, we provide a tool so that those participants who are actually volunteering their information, donating to their information for the sake of research and science, actually get something back. So often we hear that when people participate in research, they don't know what happens with that contribution. If you participate in a survey, you press the submit button and that information goes somewhere, but we don't really know what that somewhere is. So, so CVR is a little bit different in that way, because like I said, it helps us understand the experience of living with a bleeding disorder from affected participants and their unaffected family members. It provides the patient tools and resources to become active members of their healthcare. It helps the researchers monitor social trends and health trends like I showed you with the vaping and the COVID-19. How are those things really affecting our community? Before CVR, we really had no mechanism by which we could check the pulse, check to see how is our community navigating a crisis, a health crisis. Helps identify new areas of research that come directly from the lived experience. It provides participants with access to virtual advisory panels that I'll discuss with you guys in a little bit. And it provides ways for participants to help shape future projects. It helps NHF advocate for the bleeding disorders community and provides participants access to paid surveys, the additional surveys that I was telling you about. So, and it helps NHF educate, develop educational programs, right? Because we can understand what that lived experience is telling us. Is it, are patients reporting a lot of pain? Are they reporting a lot of limitations? Are they excited about gene therapy? Are they scared about gene therapy? Are they having issues with insurance? Are they having issues with working? So all those trends, all that data, we can actually look and then tailor the education to that specific gap that has been identified. So the information gathered is pretty unique. Some of it, of course, is collected in other registries, but some of it is very unique to the CVR. So of course we collect demographic information like names and first three zip code digits of the zip code, to try to understand who you are. We collect email addresses because that's how we communicate with our patients, with our participants. But those things are kept, once they're collected and a number is assigned to the patient, to the participant, that information is segmented and stored away in a very safe place. So the data that we're always handling is actually associated to that individual through a number, through what we call a FIRE ID. So we look at things as diagnosis, as comorbidities, any other health issues that we are seeing within our community. Is it similar to the normal population, or is there anything that we should be looking in more deeply? Inhibitor status, treatment, gene therapy, bleeding history, pain treatment, mental health, very important. In pain treatment, we look at medical marijuana. Are participants using medical marijuana? What are they using it for, and does it work, right? We have very little information about how medical marijuana is being used in patients, much less in patients with bleeding disorders. So how physically active they are there any sexual activity limitations, providers, so that we can try to ascertain whether a patient seeks care in an HTC or a non-HTC. NHF and other organization participation, the camp experience, and dental care. And of course, all questions are voluntary. There's always a way that the patient cannot answer that question by selecting, I don't know, I rather not say. There's always one option that gives the opportunity to skip a question if the patient or the participant doesn't feel comfortable doing it. And I'm sorry I keep saying patient, but I am a nurse, and sometimes old habits die hard. So CVR participation protection. So before I continue, I would like to share that the CVR, we took a long and very hard thought process to make sure that the participants who decided to enroll in the CVR and to answer surveys, that they were as protected as possible. So we have gotten a certificate of confidentiality from the NIH to protect the privacy of CVR participants. And that what it does is that it protects participants to be in there, that are there, from anybody coming, any authority, immigration, or any authority per se, police or anything, to come in and ask questions about our participants. That allows us to say, nope, I'm sorry, our participants are protected by this certificate of confidentiality. Our project was reviewed twice by the Advara IRB and was deemed exempt both times. The data is always and will always be reported in an aggregate and de-identified manner. And I'm going to show you what that looks like. But basically what that means is that they will never share my data, Maria data. They'll share Women who are 50 years old, who have von Willebrand's disease, report having pain. So the idea is to group this information and to be able to look for those patterns and for those salient findings by grouping people and their data. Data is maintained by Arbometrics, which uses standard security measures to encrypt personal data, both in storage and in transmission. And it also uses logical databases systems that segment data to further prevent hidden identifiability. So obviously, I'm not a data safety expert. We hire experts to do that for us. And if anybody has any questions, we're always happy to put you in contact with those with Arbometrics on our behalf. So now let's look at those ways in which we've created this partnership, right? So I told you that this is much more than you answering a few questions and then pressing the submit button and then taking it out. So the participant dashboard is something that we give the participants after they've completed the enrollment survey, they've completed the baseline survey, right? They complete the enrollment survey, the baseline survey gets to them in a way of an email. They'll answer that baseline survey. And then once they answer that baseline survey, they all get another email with an access to the patient dashboard. And the patient dashboard looks just like what I have in the bottom of the screen. So when you come in, you have these 3 tiles that you also have. You can see them on the top as well, in which you can see the surveys. This is where all the surveys will be housed, where there are surveys that you've taken. So there's the record that you've taken them and what you answered, and then the health reports. The health reports are it's that data that comes from the answers of the baseline survey at this moment. And so it's looking at things like, it's giving you information on things like pain, on the living experience of women's issues, on activity, on employment, on depression and anxiety. You know, many of the questions that we're actually asked are now will be portrayed, and I'll show you a little bit a screenshot of what that looks like. And resources. So resources, this tab is a curated tab, also put together from our research staff, and it pulls a lot from the National Hemophilia Foundation publications, but also goes outside there. But the important thing is that all the resources that you find in here are resources that have been vetted by the research department, and that we know, we're confident that it's providing you accurate and timely information. So this is when you go in, this is what the health reports look like. So you see in the top, you have pain, medical marijuana, employment, women's experience, vaping, hospitalizations, COVID-19, gene therapy, etc. So each one of those tabs will bring you to a dashboard just like this. So we're now looking at the pain dashboard. So you see that we have frequency of pain, and it shows you what the results are. Intensity of pain, you can click at its worst or on average, and this is what the responses are. The impact of pain, same thing, you can select any of these questions. And interference from pain. Remember I told you about patient-reported outcome instruments? Well, these are them. These are ways of, for example, it's a validated questionnaire that we are confident that measures how much pain interferes with your day-to-day life. So what's neat about this is that we can now take something that is very subjective as pain and quantify it in a way that gives us a little bit more information, but also allows us to compare to other populations. Is the pain interference from our community different than that from others? Let's say patients with heart disease, or patients with arthritis, or patients with, you know, any other condition. If I was a participant, I would see my response here. So I would be comparing my response to the responses of others. Okay. Another important thing to see is that this is live data. This is a true reflection of what we have in the database. So right now it's reflecting from 844 patients. We actually have over almost 1,300, but these are the patients who have actually completed the baseline survey. okay? And the other thing that you can see is that you can actually filter the way this dashboard looks like by sex and by employment status. The more information we start gathering from patients, the more filters we will be able to add. However, because we are very cognizant of the privacy of our participants, we don't want those filters to get too granular for fear that our participants might be able to identify it. But this is what the pain dashboard looks like, and they're all very similar depending on the other diagnosis. So virtual advisory panels, what are those? I told you that those is a mechanism that we have to ensure that the community's voices and the community's perspective and their thoughts, their ideas are actually part of any process, our process. So what does that look like? Or what is it? So again, it's a way of including the community's voice, and it provides an opportunity for the community to provide input to guide a process, whether it's the study design or marketing campaign, education, programmatic, etc. These participants are reimbursed for their times. Usually this VAPs, virtual advisory panels, last about 2 to 3 hours. So obviously participants are reimbursed for their time. And and they remain anonymous. They're only identifying if NHF is collaborating with other partners, only NHF knows what their identity, the participant's identity is. And we do that because to protect, for confidentiality purposes, but also because NHF needs to know who they are because we need to pay them. So that's how we've been doing them, and they've been very, very successful. And then eligibility and topics of discussion vary. It varies by project, by who is it that NHF is collaborating with or not. Sometimes NHF does it on their own. Sometimes we do it with researchers. Sometimes we do it with industry, for example. And how they work is they're virtual, of course, like the name says, and you see the Zoom background. And I know we're all zoomed out, but what Zoom or any webinar platform does is that it allows for varied patients from all over the United States, no matter where they live. If they live in a city or in a small town, if they're a rural community, if they live in the north or the south or the east or the west or the center of the United States, right? So it really doesn't matter where they live. They can all be part of this project. And so the way that it happens is, of course, participants have to enroll in the CVR. They take the baseline survey that comes to them in an email. And then based on a pre-established criteria, let's say, I want to talk to women who have von Willebrand's disease because I am trying to design a research study with them in mind, and I want to get their opinion. So we identify those people that have von Willebrand's disease, that are female. NHF sends them an email invitation. Everything's done confidentially. And then those people who are interested in participating, of course, we give the details of what the project entails, who are we collaborating with, if anybody, how much they will get paid, and the instructions on how to respond. Once participants respond, then the NHF department actually goes and seeks them out, because part of the screening survey, we ask them for their contact information, and then so that's how NHF, reaches out to them. Another aspect of the CVR is the Cvr record. And I already showed you what the dashboard looks like, but if you see in the upper right-hand corner, the Cvr record, that is there for participants to, it's populated either through one of the surveys or the Cvr record survey, and it populates something that looks like this. Obviously mine doesn't, because I am not a participant. This is just a record, but it provides a name, an email, date of birth, height and weight, any allergies to food or medication. And then it lists their conditions, any medical condition that they have, the severity. And it also provides, once the participant takes the survey, It provides information such as medications that they take, their pharmacy contact information, their healthcare provider contact information. And the idea with this is that participants can then export this, print it, or export it, send it via email, whatever they wish, and they can send it or they can keep a record for themselves. This is obviously not a care plan, treatment of care. This is not a prescription in any way, stretch or form, but it provides a way to consolidate all that medical information so that when you need to share it with a school or a healthcare provider or a dentist, you actually can print this out and hand it to them. So I want to share with you, I want to spend the next few minutes, let me see how much time I have, to actually share with you what we've learned so far. So 14 out of the 87 respondents that were in that vaping survey that we did very early on, as you can see, we only had 87 people respond because it was very early on in the CVR. We asked them, do you vape? 87% said responded. 14 out of those 87 said they did. And of those 14, 2 responded are having unusual symptoms, such as cough, chest pain, shortness of breath, etc. So what we did after that, obviously this was a very small surveys at the very beginning, but we were trying to see if our idea of not only trying to understand what's going on with the community right then and there, to try to address any issues, was working. And then it allows us to ensure that the people who actually vaped in our community had access to reliable information and were aware of all the risk and health issues that were plaguing the news in case they were not aware of them. So I told you that we asked about medical marijuana use, and 36% of our participants, of the 844, so over a little bit over a third, said that they used medical marijuana. Most of them, more than half, used it for pain. A little bit less than half used it for anxiety, and for depression, 13%. And then when we asked them, how effective do you feel that it worked for you? More than a third said that in that scale from 1 to 10, it was 6 or more. So more than a third said that they saw some benefit in using it. Again, information that we don't know, that we are not gathering anywhere else. So when we asked them family history of a bleeding disorder at the time of diagnosis, this was interesting. It's almost 57% said that they did not have family history of a diagnosis, which is it's a little bit higher than what we see in the literature. And remember, 2 things. This is reported by the patients, and it's only the patients that are in the CVR, so it's not necessarily a true representation, but it could be an indication that we need to look at that a little bit more. So when we look at women with bleeding disorders, 73 of the 213 women that we have answered the baseline, 73% have been pregnant, 43% of them have had a miscarriage, and more than half have reported bleeding before or after childbirth. When we ask them, do you receive treatment for mental health or emotional health of some sort? 75% of participants, those 844, said that they receive some form of treatment for mental or emotional health, which, it's surprising. It's a little bit high, of course. 39% says counseling, 75% of them said medication, and 55 of them reporting receiving therapy. What's refreshing to see is that when we look at social support, and social support is important because it provides individuals the tools that they need and the support that they need to navigate crises or tough times, right? So when we look at social support, and this also comes from a patient-reported outcome measure, those validated questionnaires that I was telling you about. So when we look at the question that says, I get invitations to go and do things with other people, 65% say that almost as much or as much as they would like, right? So that's a person that feels very included in society. When we look at the question, I get help when I'm sick in bed, 71% say almost or as much almost as much or as much as I would like. Again, we would like these numbers to be 100%, of course, but 71% is a good number. And I have people who care what happens to me. So almost 80% of them say almost as much or as much as I would like. And again, these are, indicating the amount of social support that our patients, our participants have. So even though they have a lot of, they're involved in a lot of mental health treatment, they also have a strong support system, and because we have just an incredible community.
This is a friendly reminder to please fill out and turn in your session evaluation forms. Your feedback matters to us, and it helps to plan an even better BDC in 2022. Complete this evaluation form and you will be automatically entered into a raffle for a $75 gift card. Raffle winners are selected on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. We will be emailing those winners to notify them. As always, thank you for participating in this session, and thank you for joining us at NHF's 73rd Annual Bleeding Disorders Conference.
Wow, Rosaura, thank you. So I ended about 5 minutes earlier, and I would love to be able to entertain some questions that the group might have. So please feel free to write them in the chat, and I'll try to address them as many. I'll try to address as many as I can. I hope you take a few minutes to consider enrolling in the Cvr. This QR code, if you point it with your phone camera, it'll take you to the enrollment survey. No, it actually take you to the enrollment page where you can read about what the Cvr is. You can look at the frequently asked questions. You can really get to know the Cvr a little bit better. And you can also enroll by clicking the enroll button. So I hope that you consider enrolling. Thank you so much for your attention. It's been a pleasure, and I hope you are enjoying our meeting and continue to do so in the next few days.